In this introductory lecture, we're going to look at the human organism. An overview of anatomy and physiology. So you're taking anatomy and physiology. Well, what the heck is anatomy and physiology? Well, first we have anatomy. And if we take this word anatomy and we cut it apart, we have ana and tomi. And ana means a way, and tomi means to cut. So anatomy or anatomy means to cut away or cut apart. And what do we cut apart? We cut apart structures. So anatomy is the scientific discipline that investigates the body's structures. Physiology is the scientific investigation of the processes or functions of living things. So here we're looking at how things work. We're looking at function. For instance, a cell. If we look at the different physiological actions of a cell, we can look at how the cell divides, how a cell uses energy to metabolize, how a cell performs its specific functions, like in neurophysiology, and etc. So topics of anatomy, we have gross or macroscopic anatomy and microscopic anatomy. We talk about gross anatomy. We're not talking about how if you go in to see a cadaver and you're like, ooh, gross. No, that's not what we're talking about. In other words, gross or macroscopic anatomy, you don't need necessarily magnification to see it. It's what you can see with the naked eye. So these are structures examined without a microscope. And we can break this down into regional anatomy, systemic anatomy, and surface anatomy. Regional anatomy is typically what you have in upper level anatomy classes, and this is where you study area by area. So typically grad school or professional school, you'll study regional anatomy. Like for instance, you'll study head and neck, and you'll see how all the anatomy is kind of put together and how each part functions with one another. You might look at like the side of the head, for instance, the side of the face. You'll see the integumentary system, which is the skin. You'll dissect down, get through some superficial fascia, and then you come up to a gland like on the side of the jaw. This is the parotid gland. You might notice that there's a nerve going through the parotid gland and some blood vessels surrounding it. As you move that out of the way, you'll see the masseter muscle underneath, and so on. So you kind of see and learn anatomy, how it is in place. Systemic anatomy is what most undergrad classes are. So your anatomy and physiology classes, your A&P classes, this class that you're taking right now is a systemic anatomy class. And this is where you study system by system as if that system existed by itself. For instance, we'll be studying the nervous system by itself. We'll be studying the muscular system, the integumentary system, the skeletal system. So we'll be studying those individually. And this is always a great foundation for if you go on, to grad school and take regional anatomy, now you can see it all put together. And then surface anatomy. I don't know if you've ever been to a hospital emergency room before, but one thing you might notice is that most people, actually at any doctor's office or hospital, that most people still have their skin on. Have you noticed that? Well, I know that's kind of ridiculous, but with surface anatomy, you're going to look at specific landmarks on the surface of a person in order to figure out what is below those landmarks, so that you might have to take an x-ray. A physician might have to insert a catheter, such as a subclavian line. If you're going to give an injection, okay? For instance, what muscle in your butt, like you're going to get an injection in the butt, what muscle do you think you're going to stick that needle into? I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay. How many of you said you're going to stick that needle into the gluteus maximus muscle? Raise your hand. Okay, you're not raising your hand. I know you're watching a video. Go ahead, raise your hand. Okay, now don't you feel a little ridiculous raising your hand? Nobody's around. Anyway, I'm sorry, that would be incorrect because the gluteus maximus overlies a big nerve that's about as wide as your thumb. Okay, pretty big nerve that's called the sciatic nerve. And if you have a patient, especially a senior patient that has like next to no, butt, little skinny butt, you stick that needle in, you can hit that nerve. And that would be extremely painful, might even cause the person to have nerve damage. They might not be able to use that leg very well. So good news, bad news. Bad news, you hit the nerve, the patient's in horrible pain. Good news, you'll probably be able to outrun them because they will probably want to strangle you for doing that. The actual muscle that you usually do an injection in is the gluteus medius, which is in the upper outer quadrant of the butt. Okay, I know all these technical terms, but anyway, but knowing surface anatomy and knowing what structures are deeper to those areas, then you know what you're going to be able to get to, like I said, with a needle or with an injection or taking an x-ray, etc. Now, microscopic anatomy, these are structures seen with the microscope. We have cytology, and cytology is cellular anatomy, and there are cytologists out there and cytotechs, and they're going to look at cells, individual cells. Typically, cytotechs will look at cells to see if they look abnormal. For example, doing pap smears, for instance, it's the cytotech's job to screen those cells out, and then when it's deemed that these are abnormal looking cells, then the pathologist will take a look at them and make the diagnosis. Histology is actually where you take a chunk of tissue and it's prepared, sliced super thin. When I say super thin, I'm talking one cell layer thick. This allows light to pass through it relatively easy. And we stain it with various stains. These stains are going to help bring out structures within the tissue. Most tissues will have kind of a pinkish looking stain. That stain is what we call an H&E or hematoxylin eosin stain. But we can get fancy with the stains too and use tricolor stains and multicolored stains and such, which are more specialized. So anytime you have anything done, like you have surgery or you have a mole removed or anything like that, typically that tissue gets sent down to the histotech, and that histotech is going to cut up the tissue according to the way the doctor describes how they want the tissue cut up, and it's prepped. Again, it's dehydrated, slices are made, stains are put in place, and these things are fixed to a slide. And we'll be looking at slides later, which were most likely prepared by a histotech. Okay, if you were taking this this class live, in an actual, you actually have an anatomy lab, then you'd be pulling out a microscope and pulling out these slides and looking at them. But we'll be taking a look at some of these slides in this course as well. Okay, so topics of anatomy. It's going to reveal the dynamic nature of living things, and we consider the operation of specific organ systems, I mentioned before, like cell physiology, examining the processes in cells like division, cell respiration, metabolism, etc., etc. We can get very specialized. I mentioned neurophysiology, where we focus on the nervous system. How does it conduct nerve impulses? Um, does it reproduce? How does it metabolize? Etc., etc. Pathology, we're looking at disease. Okay. And a pathologist is typically an MD or DO that has specialized in diseases. And they're the ones I mentioned earlier that'll take a look at those cells, those abnormal cells from the cytotech. They'll take a look at the slides from the histotech to see if they're abnormal and make a diagnosis from there. And they used to be the ones that did most of the autopsies and everything. Now there are pathology techs, pathology assistants, I should say that. As a matter of fact, my wife works with pathology assistants, and it always throws me off when she talks about the PAs because I automatically think of physician assistant. But right up there with the physician assistant, there are pathology assistants. And their job is to help with autopsies, perform the autopsies, take these tissues, prep them to get them to the histotechs, and so on. And then, we can look at some dynamic things that go on in the human body, such as exercise physiology. That was kind of a popular major for quite a while, and I'm sure there's still colleges that have degrees in that. But just seeing how the body works under stress and demand. And here we're going to look at the structural and functional organization of the human body. We're going to start off at the most basic level, the chemical level. And here at the chemical level, we have atoms. Now, if you take two or more atoms, put them together, you're going to wind up with molecules. And we have some very complex molecules in the body. We have proteins. We have fats or lipids. We have carbohydrates. We have nucleic acids, such as DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, or RNA, ribonucleic acid. Those are molecules. And then we move to the cellular level. So cells are going to be made up of groups of molecules, a few of those molecules I just mentioned. So molecules are arranged to form cells. Now, at the tissue level, if we have a group of cells, we're going to call that a tissue. Okay, so tissues are groups of cells. Like, for instance, we can have a muscle cell. If we have a bunch of muscle cells, we have muscle tissue. And again, cells are made up of molecules. When you eat and digest things, you are taking that tissue, you're chewing it up, you're mixing in some enzymes, whether it be plant or animal, but you're breaking down those cells into their individual molecules to be able to use to build up our tissues. Now, if we take a group of tissues, for instance, we might take an epithelial tissue, such as pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Okay, don't freak out. It's easier than you think to learn this, so don't worry about the big words. They'll come. You'll be surprised how easy it is to learn these things. But we'll take that pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, and maybe we'll put in some connective tissue. Maybe we'll throw in a layer of hyaline cartilage, and then some more connective tissue, maybe some adipose tissue. And okay, those are all different tissues. There was epithelial tissue, there was connective tissue. Okay, what else was there? Well, that's it. Epithelial and different connective tissues I mentioned. Okay. Anyway, that created an organ. Okay, I just described what it looks like to see a trachea underneath the microscope. Okay. So anytime when we look at those slides, maybe the slide says pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, but you're still going to see hyaline cartilage, you're going to see connective tissue, you're going to see some smooth muscle. I missed that. Some smooth muscle. And that's because organs are made up of groups of tissues. Okay. And then organs, systems, are made up of groups of organs. So, for instance, if you take some teeth, a tongue, you throw in an esophagus and a stomach, attach some intestines to it, throw in a liver for good measure, maybe a pancreas. What do we have? Those are all different organs. But the organ system is going to be the digestive system. Okay, totally different organs. Okay, you can't get any more different than teeth and, a liver. Okay, totally different. But they work together to perform a certain function, in this case, the digestive function. And then if we take a bunch of organ systems and put them together, what do we get? An organism. In this case, yes, a human organism, the human body. And so here we have all the different levels of organization, structural and functional organization. So we have our atoms, which make up molecules. We have our cell, which is made up of molecules. If we have a bunch of cells, we have a tissue. If we have a bunch of tissues, then we have an organ. If we have a group of organs, we have an organ system. And all those different organ systems make up an organism. So it's sometimes easier to think about it going from large to small. So an organism is made up of a group of organ systems. Organ systems are made up of groups of organs. Organs are made up of groups of tissues. Tissues are made up of groups of cells. Cells are made up of molecules, and molecules are made up of atoms. Now, organ systems of the body. We have the integumentary system, which is going to be the skin, hair, nails, and such. We have the skeletal system. Again, this is going to be made up of the bones, basically, and ligaments and tendons. Tendons are going to be more for the muscles, but they do attach to the bone. Ligaments are what hold bone to bone. The muscular system, again, which are attached to the bones, and so that's why I mentioned tendons before, but tendons attach muscles to bone. Okay. And when we talk about the muscular system, there's actually different muscles. There are the skeletal muscles, and that's normally what we think of. And when we cover the muscular system, we kind of put heavy emphasis on these skeletal muscles. But you also have cardiac muscle, which is the heart. And we have smooth muscle, which is found in anything from blood vessels to, your internal organs, such as your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines. Even your hair has a muscle attached to it, believe it or not. And we'll be talking about that when we get to the integumentary system. Okay. So these three things will be covered in this chapter so far. Lymphatic system, where we look at the lymph nodes, lymphatic tissue, Um, and this is going to be for part of your immune system. That's part of it. The other part of it is it helps regulate body fluids in the tissues. For instance, if body fluid builds up in the tissues, well, the excess that doesn't go back into the bloodstream will then get drained off by the lymphatic systems. That's why if someone has a damaged lymph node for whatever reason, then sometimes, especially if it's in a limb, then you can get swelling in that limb if there's damage to that lymph node, or if that lymph node was removed or such. And we typically show it as green, mainly because, well, red and blue we use for the circulatory system. Yellow we typically use for the nervous system. And since lymph is clear, we had to give it some kind of a color. So if your lymph is green, I suggest you get to the doctor right away. You probably need an antibiotic, okay, because lymph is clear. Okay, obviously the lymph nodes are not, but lymph itself is. And we also have accessory organs that go along with it as well, such as the spleen and thymus and such. And then the respiratory system, where we go from the nose all the way down to the tiny little microscopic air sacs that make up the bulk of the lungs, and all the conducting systems in between. And this is going to be primarily for gas exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. So we give off carbon dioxide, we take in oxygen. But there's other functions as well for the respiratory system, such as pH balance of the blood and such. Now, that and the digestive system and the lymphatic system, that's all second semester stuff. But going to the digestive system, we start from the mouth all the way to, what's that planet near Neptune? Oh yeah, Uranus. Okay, so from your mouth to Uranus and beyond. No, anyway, that is going to make up the digestive system. We have the mouth, the teeth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine. And there's 3 parts to the small intestine. The large intestine, okay, the rectum. We have some accessory organs like the liver, gallbladder, pancreas. Okay, so all of that is to basically take down those tissues, again, either plant or animal or both tissues that we eat, break it down into its molecular form so that we can absorb those molecules and build up our tissues. The nervous system we will be covering in this semester, okay, and in this particular course. And that is going to include the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. And then we have the endocrine system, which is a second semester, a part 2 course. And I like to talk about the nervous system and the endocrine system together. And I know some instructors do teach those together because these are the control systems of the body. Okay, the control systems of the body. I like to think of the nervous system as your wired communication. I like to think about your endocrine system as kind of your Wi-Fi communication. Okay, so nervous system, we have the wires. Let's suppose, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm having a garage sale, a rummage sale, and I have a lamp for sale. Somebody comes up, hey, is this lamp work? Well, let's see. Plug it into an extension cord, turn it on. Yep, it works. And they're like, okay, I'll take it. And I don't know, I'm feeling a little lazy. I don't feel like bending over and unplugging it again. And there's some scissors sitting here, so I take the scissors and I clip the cord, hand them the lamp and say, thank you, have a nice day, please pay my wife at the end of the driveway. Well, they're a little upset that the lamp isn't working. Well, I just showed you it's working, right? No. What happened? We have a perfectly good lamp, but I cut the cord um, that puts power basically to that lamp. Same thing with the nervous system. Whatever nerve might get damaged or cut, it's going to affect whatever that nerve is innervating. So, whereas endocrine system, think about your cell phone. We'll put it that way. It's kind of like the cell phone. Like, right now there are thousands of people in your area making phone calls. Now, is your phone ringing? And the odds are somebody who's listening to this, your phone is probably ringing. It's not me, trust me. I'm not calling you to make sure you're studying. That's up to you. But okay, most of you though, your phone's not ringing. Well, how come it's not ringing when we're being showered by those calls going out? Okay, from your cell tower, whatever cell tower is closest to you. Well, we're being showered by those things. But here's the thing, your phone is not ringing because nobody has targeted your specific phone number. In other words, if they punch in your phone number, that is going to target your phone and cause your phone to react. In other words, ring or buzz or whatever you have your phone set to do. Well, same thing with the endocrine system. We have these little chemicals that are released called hormones. And these hormones are going to go throughout the entire body, but they're not going to affect every cell. They are going to look for specific target cells. Okay? So specific target cells. And once they find those target cells, they will either attach to the outside of the cell or go on inside the cell into the nucleus, depending on what type of hormone it is, and cause that cell to react. Okay, whatever that reaction is. Maybe the reaction is to make a protein. Okay, like we see with steroid hormones. Or it might tell that cell to turn on and make an enzyme or something. So that's why I think of the endocrine system as like your Wi-Fi or your phone communication, wireless communication basically, and the nervous system is the wired communication. Here's another difference between the two as well. The nervous system, the reaction tends to be fast but short-lived. Okay. And again, these are very broad statements. There's always exceptions to everything, but it tends to react fast, and that reaction is short-lived. The endocrine system, it takes a while to get a reaction, but that reaction tends to take longer, or last longer, I should say. Here's an example. What if you're over there looking at your phone, not paying attention, maybe texting somebody, and you step out in the street, but out of your peripheral vision, you notice this big bus coming, and you jump back onto the curb, just missing getting creamed by that bus. Okay? Okay, what was it that caused you to react? Well, you saw the bus out of your peripheral vision. Maybe you heard the bus. Maybe you smelled the bus. Buses are pretty smelly. With that exhaust and everything. But that's your nervous system. Okay, everything I just mentioned there, sense of smell, sense of sight, the fact that that impulse was sent down to your legs and you jumped backward out of the way, that was nervous system. That happened without hardly thinking about it. Okay? Very little thought went into it. That's where reflexes kind of come in. And then maybe a few seconds later, all of a sudden your brain kind of processes what happens, and now your heart is pounding out of your chest. And maybe you start to shake. That's where the endocrine system comes in. Endocrine system just released epinephrine, okay, what you might know as adrenaline. And now that's causing the nerves to be hyperactive, and that's where the shaking comes in. It causes a fight or flight mechanism, which is why your heart is racing. But if you say to yourself, hey, I didn't get hit by that bus, I'm fine. Okay, does that do anything to slow your heart rate down or to stop you from shaking? No, it's going to last a little while. Okay, so endocrine system, the effects tend to last longer, but it takes a little longer for that to actually take effect. It might be seconds, but still, if you waited seconds before getting out of the way of the bus, then you'd be a hood ornament. Okay, the nervous system, when you jumped back out of the way, did you keep jumping? It's like, was this person a backwards kangaroo or something? No, you didn't keep jumping backwards. You jumped back once and stopped and, figured out kind of what happened there. Okay. Okay, so I hope you've got the idea between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Cardiovascular system, that's a part 2 thing as well. This is the heart, the blood vessels, and all the blood and everything found within the cardiovascular system. This is going to be a transport system, basically taking nutrients, taking waste products, taking oxygen, delivering it to cells, taking stuff away from cells, taking it to, things like the kidneys to be gotten rid of, and so on. So that's the cardiovascular system. Urinary system and reproductive systems, again, those are covered in part 2. Urinary system, your kidneys, urinary bladder, and urethra. Those help to eliminate wastes from the body. They can also help regulate pH. I always like to say that the urinary system puts the P back in pH, but it can help regulate if your blood is too acid, then you might pee out some extra hydrogen ions and retain bicarbonate ion, and vice versa. If your blood is too alkaline, you might pee out more bicarbonate ion and hold on to hydrogen ions to make the blood a little more acid again. Okay, so that's the urinary system. Basically, we're getting rid of nitrogenous wastes with the urinary system, nitrogen-containing wastes like urea. And then we have the male and female reproductive systems, and that is to continue on our species. Okay, characteristics of life. We have organization, and this is conditions in which there are specific relationships and functions. We have metabolism, and metabolism, we hear that term all the time, I got a high metabolism, I got a low metabolism. What does that mean? Well, it's just a word we use to describe all the chemical reactions that take place in the body. And responsiveness, and this is the ability to sense changes and adjust. Somebody pokes you with a stick, you withdraw from the stick. Or you might grab the stick and start poking them with it. But anyway, if you're cold, what might you do? You might shiver. And I had a student one time say you'd put on a sweater. We all kind of thought that was kind of funny, and it's like, well, wait a second. No, that's true too. Some responses are going to be autonomic, like shivering. Okay, we don't just turn it on and say, oh, you know what? I'm going to start shivering. Okay, it's kind of an autonomic response. But then there are conscious responses as well. And that would be, the idea of putting on a sweater. So we can respond. Growth, we start off as one cell. That one cell becomes 2, the 2, 4, the 4, 8, and that's all the math I know. But anyway, all the way up to we are trillions of cells. Okay? And so we're going to grow. Our organs grow. We grow. Okay, development. And these are changes over time. We have differentiation and we have morphogenesis. Differentiation is the change from general to specific. Remember, I talked about we are one cell. When those cells divide, for the most part, those are little clones of each other. Eventually, those little clone cells, that little ball of clone cells, are going to have to start to specialize. And then the cells turn on some genes, turn off other genes, and they become skin cells, or they become blood cells, or what else? Brain cells. And then the other cells laugh and say, oh, yeah, right, you a brain cell. No, but you got the idea. We're going to go from general to very specific. And then morphogenesis. This is change in shape of tissues and organs. I don't know if you've ever heard of the term form follows function. So what the heck does that mean? Form follows function. Well, I may not be teaching very much longer because pretty soon I'll be a billionaire. And yes, thank you. And no, I don't owe you money. But you can get in on this if you'd like. Okay, I'm going to, if you have a PayPal account, you can definitely send in some money. But I've noticed when I've looked at tires that all tires on like cars and trucks are round. How boring. So I'm coming up with all these different shaped tires. I came up with like a triangle tire. That didn't work too well. That just kind of messed up the transmission. But finally I came up with like octagon, like stop sign shaped tires. And it's pretty cool. Okay. Now, here's the thing. I did notice as you're driving along that you start to lose maybe some nuts and bolts. So we have coupons that we will give our customers from like the auto parts store, like O'Reilly's Auto Parts and Napa. They've offered coupons to me to give to my people so they can buy new mufflers and such. And also coupons from local chiropractors because after a little while of driving in there, it is a little rough, but they look cool. Who's in on it? Hello? Is this thing on? Okay, so you're thinking this isn't a very good idea. How come? There's a reason why tires are round. It's a lot smoother to ride, right? So we have to think about the function of that tire, and we're going to make the form or shape of that tire to optimize its function. So can I drive on octagon tires? Yeah. Is that a good form or shape for those tires? No. A better shape is nice and smooth and round. Okay, so that's where form follows function. So back to morphogenesis, these cells are going to have different shapes depending on what they do. Some cells are going to be flat and thin, and its function is to allow like gases to pass through, like oxygen, carbon dioxide, much easier. Okay. Other cells are going to be tall, but they're going to have little structures sticking out of them, which increase the surface area. And we're going to find those like in the intestine. And the more surface area you have, the more nutrients can be absorbed. Okay. What else? Other tissues might have multiple layers, which would help against abrasion. Others have single layers where there's not going to be a lot of abrasion. And then we move up to like the tissues and organs are going to have their specific shapes, again, because of the function that they have to perform. Okay? So that's what morphogenesis is. And then reproduction, well, we can talk about new cells as opposed to organisms. Okay? A lot of our cells, most of our cells, reproduce through cell division, not all of them. And you might be surprised at some of these that don't reproduce. And we'll be talking about those when we get to those sections. But most of them do. As opposed to looking at reproduction of the organism itself, creating a new human.